I'm Kristen McAllister, I'm president of Cerius Executives, and welcome to our Cerius Leadership Series. It's one of the many opportunities we'd like to get executives in our network, clients, individuals who are just really interested in how do I figure out how to lead better and learn about those things I did not go to college for, or I have not been exposed to yet, or I have no desire to dig deep into it, but this show is so entertaining. I'll give you 30 minutes. There are many ways to grow a business, and one of those best ways is with a straight line. So when you're able to leverage the expertise and the experience of those who have been down that path before, you're able to take all of those zigzags on that growth curve, because it's never a straight curve, and make it as straight as possible. So today we are discussing how to best navigate that legal and HR relationship with Darren Chiappetti, which I will say, Darren, to your credit, I don't know that there's a better person who can really walk us through how do you balance the business side with the legal side, with the employee side, because you need all three of them. You are a labor and employment attorney, a global HR compliance and employee relations executive, just substantial experience in tourism, hospitality, media, entertainment, really those industries where if something's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong, and it's going to go wrong publicly.
Yeah, yeah,
You've been there. So thank you for joining us today.
sure, absolutely.
And I will say, nothing derails progress in a company's growth, especially for small to mid-sized businesses, than lawsuits and employee relations issues. So today, really want to dig in and get your advice. Have you talked through some scenarios, some suggestions of how to make sure everyone is aligned on risk mitigation, especially when working through potential challenges and you've got to get involved. I shouldn't even say that, not you've got to get legal's involved, HR's involved. I'm doing my best here, Darren, to
Right.
not put any spin on it. Take it away.
Absolutely. So, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining. To Kristen's point, I've had this really strange kind of journey in my career where I've learned a couple languages to speak fluently. One is I speak business fluently because I was a leader at Disney theme parks, and I speak legal fluently, and I speak HR fluently, which are three weird languages that sometimes come together and don't actually match, right? And so I am very, very used to hearing people say, oh, do we have to take it to legal? Do we have to go to HR? Because that's the location where what? Where dreams go to die. And so I get it. It's a different mindset, right? And so depending on kind of what your role is, depending on where you work, depending on what your goals are, depending on what kind of company or what kind of services that you offer, sometimes it can really feel like more than just a speed bump. It can feel like one of those barriers that will stop an 18-wheeler truck, right? So I always love to kind of start with talking about you really want it at the end of the day, to Kristen's point, there are so many landmines right now when it comes to business in general. Well, the employee side, I'll probably talk a lot about because that's kind of my background. But really, in any area whatsoever, there's a lot of uncharted territory. There's a lot of things that we don't know. Just look at AI, right? Look how things are changing so quickly. Privacy laws in what we're doing that you really kind of need that tour guide to navigate you through what these changing laws are. But the one thing I always love to tell folks is I want everyone to keep in mind that if and when, I should say when, there shouldn't be an if, right? When you reach out to legal, when you reach out to HR, when you reach out to somebody to get assistance, because every one of us is that subject matter expertise or expert in what we do. Please remember, it is just one piece of the puzzle, right? A lot of times I hear from folks, well, I went to legal and they said we had to. No, legal actually made a recommendation like, hey, listen, this is kind of risky if you want to do it this way, but I might recommend that you take some other approach. It's not a mandate, it's a data point, right? So I love to start out with reminding people that when you, except in a couple of different scenarios where I will tell you the exception, when you reach out to legal, when you reach out to a lawyer, if you engage HR, if you talk to a compliance person, things like that, unless they tell you the law is this and you can't do what you want to do, if they say, hey, I might suggest that's a little risky, you might consider doing this instead, That's simply a data point, and they're just educating you on the options. And you, as a business leader, you make the ultimate decisions, right? So do keep that in mind that when legal kind of, when legal gives advice, when HR gives advice, it's not an edict. It's basically just an opportunity to use that subject matter expertise to apply it to the situation. And the great thing about it is make sure that whoever you're reaching out to, whether it's an outside lawyer, it's in-house counsel, it's an HR consultant or somebody in the company that you work with, that they understand the business. That's the most important thing, right? To Kristen's point, like nothing derails a business more than bad advice. And any one of us, lawyer, first of all, lawyers love to talk. Can you tell? We just love to chat. We love talking. But if you actually wind us up on the right pathway and let us go, we can actually be really helpful to you, but we need to understand the context. I think that's the most important thing. Really, at the end of the day, let's make sure that the business needs are being brought up in the very beginning. So that's the lens in which people can look and try to assist. So that's an overarching thing I love to remind people is it's just a data point. You don't have to necessarily do it unless someone tells you it's illegal, right?
You mentioned it's one data point. It depends on what the purpose is, what the end game. Let's start with that conversation. When is the best time to really start having that conversation? Is it just about anything that you're doing, implementing anything new? Let's make sure that we are aligned and getting recommendations with HR, and then they'll go to legal. What does that relationship look like? So I've had some people say, well, I'm not going to tell HR because they're going to tell me I can't do it.
Right.
Number one thing I hear.
So it depends. If your internal yellow flashing lights are going off because you're like, something about this doesn't feel right. And you could kind of in your mind, like play it out and you're like, I could see this going on CNN. That's probably a good time, right? Where you might want to go, let me just kind of put myself on pause and get, a thought partner, whether it's HR, whether it's outside counsel or whatever. If you're entering into new territory, and I mean that figuratively, and I also mean that literally, if you are operating, for example, one of the things that I've had the wonderful chance to work with is to work with companies that are based in one part of the world that are now operating in another part of the world. And they really may or may not have any idea what they're about to get into. So if you are, even if you're in the US and you're expanding your business into Canada, and I know my Canadian friends always love this when I advocate for them and say it is not the same as the US in many, many, many different ways, especially in employment laws, right? That's when you want to seek guidance too. Like, let's not assume it's great when we can admit we don't know what we don't know. And if you're in that situation where you're like, you know what, I don't know what I don't know about working in Canada. I don't know what I don't know about, this new part of our business that we're going to look at. Maybe we're horizontally integrating or vertically integrating, whatever it is. If you're like, we've never done this, this is uncharted territory, which is very exciting, without a doubt. That's where you want to have the guidance, right? So it's new territory from things that you're doing, actions your company's taking, businesses you're getting involved in, especially if it could kind of not run afoul of, but if it like kind of interacts with privacy laws and things like that, and also other locales. I think that's the most important thing. I remember when I graduated from law school, and I was always joking around because obviously I was much, much younger then. And I always told my friends, I'm like, by the way, if any of you like, drink and drive and get pulled over, please don't make me your first call from jail. And, I got one or two first calls from jail. And I'm like, don't do that. So proactive, right? Just like being proactive where you do a designated driver. I think that's the important thing. If you can get ahead of things that you think might be issues, that's the time to actually reach out, right? And I think any lawyer will say to you, like, okay, tell me what happened. Just tell me what you said, and I'll be able to understand where we go from here. But if we could have basically gotten in the DeLorean and gotten 88 miles an hour and got back in time, right? Any lawyer would tell you, I wish you would have called me first and we never would have been here. So I think that's kind of the sentiment, which is if you think there could be a situation where maybe you're not sure of the pathway that you're going to take, or you get to a fork in the road and you're like, neither one looks inviting to me. That's when you want to reach out and you want to find somebody who could be that, that expert-ish guide and tell you in advance. It is so much easier to plan for what is it that you want to do. Using the kind of the roadmap example, tell me where you want to go. Where's your destination? Where exactly is it that you're trying? Okay, then let's kind of take this map and let's find our way, and we'll carve our way through the woods in the way that's easiest, that's less risky, that makes everyone feel good about it, because the journey is just as important as the destination, right? But that requires kind of, doing things in advance. And I think for any of us that might be on the call today, that might be an HR leader, that might have some legal backgrounds, that might be a compliance expert, or someone who's used to providing recommendations on things. What I always find, because again, everyone does think that I'm the place where dreams go to die. I am the place sometimes where careers go to die, but that's not my fault. So the people that are behaving badly, right? But if they actually come forward, I always try, as people are thinking through and kind of sharing with me, hey, we want to do this, 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 and this. Sometimes I'll stop and say, hey, you know what? Just do me a favor. Where's your end goal? What are you trying to achieve? And I will help you map out the course that will get you there, right? We never want to say no. We want to say no, but at least that's kind of my philosophy, right?
And that's one of those, heard a lot of conversations with business owners, CEOs. They say, well, my HR person simply told me I couldn't. So it's an education process to say what should be expected of your HR person, your in-house or your external outsourced legal. Walk me through, what should I be expecting? What does that conversation look like? So either I'm coming prepared because they're not quite sure what questions to ask. It just may not be ready for that. Because to me, I want to see it as a library. I'm going to go get educated on what are my risks, what are the possible situations. So if I don't have someone who's got their checklist, what should I be prepared to ask?
Yeah,
What questions? So talk me through that checklist.
that's a great question. And one of the things that I will say, kind of overarching even before that, is hopefully everyone that's part of that, kind of like that three-legged stool that Chris had mentioned, right? There's business, there's HR, there's compliance, legal. Hopefully everybody has defined what their piece of the puzzle is, because everybody has a role, right? Everyone has a section of it that all comes together to assist in making the best decisions. It does always help to make sure that you tell your compliance, HR, legal, whoever your advocate, whoever your whoever your counsel is that's going to try to guide you, please tell them everything. At least tell people, like, listen, I get it. We're human. We have moments. There's probably things that you did or said or decisions that you made that you aren't proud of. You have to tell me what you did. If you leave something out, if you sanitize something, if you come to me asking for advice, I'm only as good as the information that you are giving me, right? There's been a couple times where, in my career, where people have come through and um, asked if we can separate somebody for performance, and we go through a bunch of stuff, and there's a checklist, and everything seems fantastic, right? And then at the very end, they'll be like, oh, and oh, by the way, I don't know, maybe this is important. I know you said we can let them go, but then yesterday they complained about discrimination. It's like, okay, you got to let me know that, right? So you don't bury the lead, right? Just make sure all the information is out there, because again, it's like a data integrity issue, just like a computer system. If you load information that is incomplete, the whatever's going to be spit out is going to be incomplete. So the first thing that I would say to your question, Kristen, is make sure that you go with, you might not have all the answers, by the way. Okay, let me just back up for a second. I know me, like my teams that work with me get very used to my questions. They'll walk in and they will be like, I did this investigation. I buttoned up, here's 12 pages of notes, and this is perfect. And then I'll ask the question, and they're like, that's the one question I didn't ask. And why do you always ask it? But we all look at it differently, right? So bring as much information as you can to whoever it is that you are asking for guidance, knowing they're going to ask questions. Don't take it personally that that's the one question maybe that you didn't ask, because every one of us looks at it from a different lens, right? So if we come into it knowing that every one of us has a role in the show, so to speak, come with the information. And again, the most important thing that I can think of is, what is the purpose? Where do you want to go with it? I'll use an example of a company I used to work at, which really wanted to kind of open up opportunities for people to join the organization that were from underrepresented populations, and just really increase diversity, which is a wonderful, wonderful goal. And one of the things that they wanted to do was, during the recruitment process, if you get through the initial screen with the recruiter, and then you get to, like, hiring manager, that at one point you get an email which says, hey, here's all the employee resource groups that we have. Would you like to chat with somebody from an employee resource group? Which essentially means like, hey, if you recognize that there's an employee group that shares a similar demographic as you, do you want to have a conversation with them? And it was lovely. And I think that they thought that, I was the place where dreams went to die, because I'm like, help me understand what we are trying to achieve there. And it was a very interesting conversation. And they're like, well, we're going to make sure that we tell the people that are employees that when they talk to the candidates, don't mention anything about the race or the demographics of the ERG, which I was like, I don't understand. That makes no sense, because I think the reason why you're doing it is if somebody looks at it and says, oh, this is great, I want to basically chat with somebody who is part of the Latinx group because I'm Latinx, is from a heritage. What they're saying is they didn't want anyone to say, hey, what is Latinx life like at your company? And have a conversation. They're like, we're not going to do that. I'm like, then I don't understand the purpose of why we're having this, why we're even opening this up, right? But through conversation and figuring out a little bit more, we were able to carve a way that was a little bit different. But the biggest question that I asked was, what is the purpose of us doing this? And what's the purpose? Because the same thing, we had a diversity question that went to candidates after the initial screen who did not get advanced, again, 30-minute conversation with a recruiter, and then got a question going, do you think XYZ company values diversity? And I'm like, what is the purpose of that question? Because a 30-minute conversation, you just found out you're not moving on in the process. What are you expecting to hear, right? So purpose. Purpose is the biggest thing. Here's the issue. Here's what we're trying to solve. Here's the purpose of it. That is going to really help your HR compliance or legal individual help guide you. And what I always like to say too is, if it's not an in-house person, let's say you have an attorney on retainer, whether it's a general lawyer or whatever, right? If they just don't seem to understand your company, and if they don't understand your business, and if their risk tolerance is different, then you might want to see if you can find someone who's a little bit more aligned. Without mentioning names, I worked at this company that used to have DVDs by mail and doesn't anymore. And that company is incredibly risk tolerant, right? And so that's one extreme. And then I used to work for this company that has a mouse that talks and a lot of furry friends with magical castles. That company does not have risk tolerance. So you have to understand, where am I in the spectrum, and find someone who is not just going to say yes, by the way, but find someone who gets that, who is on the same page as where you as a leader, your company's culture, they get it, because that's where you're going to get the person that's going to give you the best advice.
Right, just having that conversation, because we talk about the legal HR and trying to find that path forward in order to not throw up some unneeded barriers. That needs to be an open conversation. What is your risk tolerance? Am I looking at good, better, best? Or am I looking at worst to good or best to unrealistic? I've got to understand how I'm advising you on the benchmark in order to help you. I don't know which risk I'm helping you mitigate right now.
Great question, because there's legal risk, there's reputational risk. I mean, here's kind of, now let's kind of pop it back into employment, if you don't mind, because what I always remind people now is the emerging workforce has a very different tolerance for poor behaviors in a workplace. So if an emerging employee joins a company that, and I will use film and TV, for example, for Kristen's point, I spent 10 years working for most of the major Hollywood studios. And so, yes, when things went wrong, it did hit the news. And there's a lot of famous people that just didn't behave properly. But at the end of the day, film and TV production was always traditionally known as this magical forest where no one could enter, right? And it was just, well, you've seen the stuff that goes down, right? It was not the most welcoming of any workplace. That is changing, but it takes time. And so as the new workforce emerges and goes onto sound stages and sees some of the legacy things that still kind of happened, there's zero tolerance for that, right? And they're going to bring that up, and it's kind of changing how things work. But there's also zero tolerance for the way that companies respond. And so what I always tell people is, okay, here's what's going on. At the end of the day, the situation that was complained about, the person they complained about, the right way to educate, not punish, to Christian's point, is to do XYZ. It's not a terminable offense. But what I will tell you is the emerging workforce, if they complain about something, they expect that person to be gone. That's just an expectation that we all have to manage. It's just a thing that is part of the everyday life now in HR compliance and employment law, right? And the challenge that you run, and the example that I will provide, and it's a very public example, so I'm not saying anything out of school, is if you look at the Ellen Show. The Ellen Show was a very, very popular talk show, right? It was the worst kept secret in Hollywood that it wasn't the most friendly set, okay? Things came up, people complained about the environment, and the emerging workforce did not feel that it was appropriately dealt with. What happened? Went to BuzzFeed. The minute it went to BuzzFeed, one season later, the show came down. So what I like to always, to Kristen's point of what type of risk are we talking about? Well, there might not be massive legal risk in the situation like an Ellen scenario, because in California, even though abusive conduct is protected by law, it's this funky, weird definition that no one's ever going to meet. So is anyone really going to be successful on a bullying, abusive conduct, lawsuit? I mean, yes, but that's probably even not in the Ellen situation. The reputational risk is the problem. The minute it goes, so social media is the great equalizer, right? For many things, definitely for employees. If they're not happy about what's going down, they're going to take to social media. And the best example I always provide is Ellen. Even Jimmy Fallon, back in my days at NBC, I was the HR leader for the Fallon show. And some things came out about him, not quite as impactful as Ellen, but it was impactful. And so I think it's a great point to raise, which is what type of risk are we talking about? Is it company reputational risk? Is it legal risk? Is it both? It could be risk too, where you're going to lose some type of, in the employment world, you lose exemptions, right? If you don't classify people properly, if you have independent contractors that really should be employees, that's a risk too. So it's a great question for someone to always educate and tell you there's several different types of risks here, and kind of, and give you their, to your point, their litmus test. I use listen, red flashing light here. You don't want to do that. That's kind of how I provide it. But you have to think of all of them. There's a lot.
And just for clarification, because you've used the term quite a bit on emerging employees, meaning the Generation Z, those that are entering probably 5 years into the workforce, entering the workforce, that's the demographic, the generational emergent
Yes,
market.
absolutely.
Okay.
Sorry, that was the employment lawyer me not saying young people.
I,
Exactly. And let me
you're
just tell
right.
you, to your point, that emerging workforce, and probably this is probably something every one of us can relate to. Return to office, right?
Yep.
We had this pandemic situation where it was quick and crazy and down and dirty, and I don't want to think about it. Even time when I watch TV and there's like shows that were reruns of reality shows, people were wearing masks, I'm getting convulsions. I never want to go back to that. But we all lived through that, right? And if the pandemic taught us anything, it really taught us that working remotely, we were still effective. We still collaborated. We still built trust. And some companies thrived based on it. So now to come back and say, hey, everyone, welcome back. Let's get on the 405 in California. Let's commute an hour and a half to get to the office so we can collaborate. Your emerging workforce is like, I don't collaborate. I'm on Zoom calls all day with earphones in my cubicle. So you're seeing this play out right now. It is such an interesting, I don't want to call it a battle, but guess what, guys? It is, right? It's such an interesting battle because the emerging workforce is like, this makes no sense. Why are we doing this? We are just as effective as, and why am I wasting an hour and a half on the 405 when I could actually be doing productive work for you, company? And my role isn't very collaborative. So there's these one size fits all return to office edicts that some companies are providing. And you got your emerging workforce, your Gen Zs that are like, peace out, I'm not doing this. But you also have like your millennials, and I'm Gen X, and you have some of your Gen X's going, yeah, this actually is pretty cool. I kind of like this hybrid thing, right? And it's not necessarily along generational lines at all, but if there's anything that I will say is that emerging group, which is the workforce of tomorrow, is absolutely changing the face of what we do. But as leaders, what is also fascinating to me is certain people are so deeply entrenched in this is the way I'm used to working. I want everyone in the office I get that. And some businesses like film and television, you have to be on a soundstage to make a show. I absolutely get that. But what I'm seeing is a a lack of truly listening to what your employees want. And I've worked at some really wonderful companies that I was very frustrated in the fact that the employees really wanted something, and just through in a very arbitrary way, we just decided to do a one size fit all return to office. So a bit of a side tangent, but I will tell you, I think that's a topic that every one of us could probably relate to in some manner.
And let's say that for kind of to start wrapping it up, because you and I take a while, so I'm going to give us a good long ramp to off ramp here, using that as an example, because how we came up with this, we've got a number of clients who are still struggling with the remote hybrid 100% on site. Some of the employees can, some of the employees can't. We're working through those conversations. You've got an election year coming. You've got emotions that are going to be bubbling up at all time, and there's a lot of areas to manage through, because the business still needs to take care of the business. So when we look at your advice and takeaways, as I'm trying to implement what is going to be the policy and for whom, how are we going to manage through some of the extended leaves of absences, how are we going to manage through the politics in the workplace, where would you start as far as, you said pulse, HR taking a pulse, the leadership team talks recommendations, and then they go to legal and say, are we missing anything here? Kind of what's your advice for those steps to say, here's where you start, here's the first couple of steps to make sure that you're hitting everything?
Yeah, you know what? And the way I'll put it is you're probably going to start at the two ends of the spectrum and you're going to meet in the middle. Meaning senior leadership is going to have those discussions about kind of where are they at with these things? Like what should be worried about, what's going on, what's on the future. I mean, if you look at California, obviously with minimum wage for fast food workers, there were some decisions that had to be made. And some companies chose to, get rid of delivery drivers and things like that. So there's going to be a conversation at the top, right? But there's also, you need to know the pulse of your employees. Where I say that then kind of meets in the middle is that's where your HR is taking a pulse, your line managers, your people in the middle are saying, guys, here's what the employees want. Now, sometimes what the employees want and what leadership wants is not exactly the same thing. And that's where there is a rub. And that's what I will always say to Kristen, to your point, wrapping up, if I could say to any of us as business leaders, it doesn't matter what our role is. The most important thing is to listen, and actively listen. It's easy for us to get wrapped up in our day to day where we hear something and we just kind of we categorize it as noise or complaining. I once had a leader that when the issue of anxiety came out, that somebody was very anxiety ridden, was having panic attacks. The response was, "We're all stressed out. How is that any different?" Not a good response, right? Because in return to office questions, in and election years coming up, and polarizing work scenarios, lots going on in the world, guys, as we all know, right? That stuff actually comes into the workplace. You as a leader have to listen, because what you might be deemed to know versus, I knew or should have known something was going on, you might have to take some action based on it. So I think, to Kristen's point, as we navigate an upcoming election year, a very divided country right now, a very divided world right now, return to office being a hotbed, AI, all these different things, the most important thing I could say is listen. And one of the things that I always like to remind people, and this is my philosophy, is it's very easy to put an edict down to your employees or to do something different with your business. But in my opinion, it is better to be respected than to be feared. So how you communicate what you decide, how you share with the employees, how you reached the decision, because listen, transparency and being authentic. People will sniff out immediately if there's not authenticity. I am like yes, I'm a lawyer and an ER and HR executive, but I'm terrible about toeing the company line if I don't believe in it. People read my face. My team used to go, "You're putting your political face on again," and they would call me out because I don't feel it. I don't believe it. I'm transparent. I'm authentic. If my company isn't being that way and I feel it, my employees feel it, right? So at the end of the day, I think that's the most important thing. Listen, seek guidance. When you're listening, and you're hearing stuff, you're like, I don't think that that should be left unaddressed. That's when you go to legal. That's when you go to HR. That's when you're like, hey guys, help me through this. How do I handle what I just heard? And it could be something very easy. Again, there doesn't need to be an HR SWAT vehicle with sirens blaring that busts through the walls of the office and takes people to jail. It could be a very quick conversation where we kind of nip something in the bud. It could be an educational opportunity. It could be time for us to bring somebody in and talk about emotional intelligence. Whatever it is, the most important thing is you can't fix what you don't know. So if you hear something, that's when you want to basically call your phone a friend, call HR, call legal, and then figure it out together, right?
Thank you. And I love that you're seeing it as the bridge. It's where the leadership, everything that's going on, employees, we're all buried. We all have a lot to do. Really lean on and let HR be that bridge to work through the compliance to help navigate it. And that's why I let you come up with the title, because it was that we do love you and we mean it. And here's how we are going to align and all succeed. We all fail together, we all succeed together. This is a teamwork makes the dream work, not where dreams go to die, Darren. We do love you and all that you bring to the table. And Darren, thank you so much for joining us. I am sure that there might be some questions. Darren has some unique experiences. If there's anything that maybe you don't want on a public facing post in LinkedIn, please do feel free to message him directly.
Absolutely.
Please join us on the LinkedIn post in the chat. Any comments, any accolades, any we want to hear more of. I always get to wrangle Darren in for another one of these at some point in
Well, you know,
between jet setting. Thank you so much for joining us,
gotcha.
Darren, and sharing your expertise. I think few can do it in the way that you do it. You are
Thanks so
unique.
much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today on Serious Leadership, everyone. Take care.